my legs and feet were sore from trekking in the woods for 2 hours straight. I was on a camping trip for school, and the last thing I needed was to break my calves in the treacherous woods. "All right. This is where we will set up our tents. Find your partners and get cracking," my teacher yelled at everyone. Mr. Wilson, standing at a good 6'2", terrified everyone who walked past him, and it was my unlucky day to be assigned to him for this camping trip. "The food team, come with me. The shelter team will stay here and work on setting up the tents." If I thought today couldn't get any worse, well, tonight there would be other plans for me. I went to my best friend Alice to help her set up the tent. Meanwhile, our third best friend Zaid went with Mr. Wilson to learn what food we were allowed to retrieve and to hunt for fish. Well, fishing rather than hunting, but Mr. Wilson had his own ways of expressing death. "Don't worry, you guys, we will have fun. Plus I'll bring a lot of salmon for myself," Zaid said while rubbing his belly. Me and Alice laughed at his hungry demeanor, feeling a lot better that we all had each other for company. Maybe I could enjoy camping after all, I thought to myself. After a long time, we finally managed to get the tent up. Or rather, I managed to, because Alice was too incompetent to understand how to use nails. Then again, it was fun to watch her struggle, and at least she even wanted to give me company during this camping trip. Just like me, Alice was not fond of all the walking we had to do. "I'm sweating too much for this. This trip better be worth my time," Alice groaned. The rest of the day went in a blur, the food team coming back from their hunt and everyone eating the freshly cooked salmon and trout, with berries as a snack. Even if it was the smallest meal I had my entire life, it wasn't too bad. Everyone sat by the campfire, telling spooky stories and singing at the top of their lungs. I wanted to have fun just like everyone else, even Alice and Zaid joined in on the singing. However, I couldn't help but notice Mr. Wilson's stare at everyone. It wasn't a stare that spoke of authority, but a look of hunger and danger that bore into every single person in the campfire. I pretended not to notice, paying more attention to my friends, but my gut feeling led me to believe that my teacher's intentions had a sinister twist. Everyone finally returned to their respective tents. I sighed in relief while I lay on top of my sleeping bag, while Alice and Zaid snickered at my lack of composure. "You weren't even singing with us, you can't be that tired," Alice mentions, climbing into her own sleeping bag. "You were one to talk after barely doing anything to set up the tent," I retorted back. "Do you know how long it took to hook everything in place?" "All right, that's enough, ladies," Zaid spoke up. "Shut up." We all started to laugh at the light-hearted atmosphere. The feeling of dread that lurked earlier disappeared at the back of my mind. I started the conversation about the latest convention that all of us went to, and our chatter helped ease the tension on my shoulders. With friends like these, you didn't have to worry about the evil in this world as they always had your back. We spoke for a couple more minutes until Zaid mentioned he would have a walk outside. This wasn't out of the norm, as he loved walking outside at night and breathing in the nature that slumbers in the dark. Suddenly our lamps flickered, bringing back the eerie tension that I've felt the entire night. Something did not feel right, and I couldn't pinpoint why. I yelled at him to stay cautious as we were camping this time round, hoping that he would take my concerns seriously. After he left, Alice noticed the concern in my voice and comforted me, thinking that my worry was just like the act of a protective mother who makes sure their child is okay. After 10 minutes, the lights flickered once again, bringing me back from my trance. I had to tell Alice about what happened during the campfire, hoping that she would believe me. "Alice, don't you think Zaid is taking too long?" "Come on, Zaid loves taking walks in the dark outside. I'm sure he'll come back into the tent in no time." "I know, but I have a gut feeling he might be hurt. Also, Mr. Wilson gave me the creeps." Alice then ushered me to tell her more, and the more I spoke of the setting, the more agitated she got herself. Nonetheless, she reminded me that Mr. Wilson was our assigned authority for this camping trip, and if the school allowed this then we just had to trust him. "Don't worry, Zaid will be fine," Alice assured me in an attempt to make light of the situation. However, my worry only grew as more time passed. I continued to have a sinking feeling that he might be severely injured and needed help. "I'm going to go look for him. He's been gone for too long now," I exclaimed, jumping out of my sleeping bag and reaching for my shoes. "You're not going alone. Let me come with you," she responded. We had a bit of a back and forth until I caved, realizing that it was too dark outside for me to go on my own. While walking around searching for Zaid, I mentioned to Alice that I was grateful she came with me. That's when she admitted she also had the same sinking feeling as I did, especially looking at the time and noticing that it was 3 a.m. at midnight. "I know I said Zaid stays out for long, but not this long outside." I looked at the river stream, most likely the stream where the food team was fishing by. But then, as I looked closer, I noticed a maroon tint covering the soils of the ground, the metallic scent hitting my nose. "Isn't that blood?" Alice asked, noticing the change in my expression as the color drained from my face. We both saw the trail that led further down the woods, and I prayed that it was just animals hunting down their prey. As we reached the end of the trail, we gasped in horror at the sinister sight of what we had witnessed. Both me and Alice cried at Zaid's bloody body being disassembled and thrown across the entire woodland, with Mr. Wilson holding a large butcher knife. When he finally noticed us, a malevolent grin crept up his lips, internally mocking our terrified faces as we continued to stare at the crime scene before us. "What are you two doing here?" Mr. Wilson asked, his voice grave and preternatural. "Do you want to end up just like your best friend?" I slowly turned to Alice, giving her the signal for us to bolt out of there. Our movements matched our heavy breathing, my lungs ripping through my ribcage as I couldn't catch on at first Mr. Wilson's heavy footsteps. His manic laugh erupted through the woods, my heartbeats invading my ears until it was the only audible sound to me. "I hate all of you. The existence of humans angers me to my core," Mr. Wilson bellowed. Alice and I ran as fast as our trembling legs could carry us, our hearts still pounding with terror. We knew we couldn't go back to the campsite. Mr. Wilson was clearly unhinged, and we had just witnessed the gruesome fate that had befallen our dear friend Zaid. The woods were pitch black, and the trees seemed to close in on us, making it even harder to find our way. We had no choice but to push forward, deeper into the wilderness. We didn't have any communication devices with us, as they were all left back at the campsite. Our only hope was to find help, to reach the nearest ranger station or civilization. As we stumbled through the underbrush, our fear began to give way to a fierce determination. We had to survive. We had to bring justice for Zaid, our best friend, who died in the hands of Mr. Wilson. The adrenaline coursing through our veins pushed us forward, despite the fatigue and the pain in our legs from earlier. Hours passed, and the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. Exhausted and scared, we finally stumbled upon a hiking trail. It was a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had consumed our night. Following the trail, we eventually came across a small ranger station. It was a humble wooden cabin nestled in the woods. We banged on the door, shouting for help, our voices hoarse from fear and exertion. A disheveled ranger answered the door. He clearly was tired as he woke up from his slumber, ready to scream at us until he noticed our tired state. "Are you girls all right?" he asked, concern etched on the wrinkles in his forehead. He took in our frantic appearance and listened as we poured out the horrifying story of what had happened. The ranger immediately radioed for backup and medical assistance for us. Within hours, the woods were swarming with law enforcement officers, search teams, and medical personnel. They apprehended Mr. Wilson, who had retreated to a remote corner of the forest. He was clearly deranged, ranting about his hatred for humanity and how he had freed Zaid from the suffering of existence. In the days that followed, the authorities pieced together Mr. Wilson's dark history. He had a long record of psychiatric issues and a deep-seated hatred for humanity. He had somehow slipped through the cracks, landing a job as a school teacher, and had taken advantage of the camping trip to carry out his twisted plan. Zaid's friends and family were informed of his tragic death. They were devastated and heartbroken that they had lost their son, and I cried my eyes out during his funeral. Even though I was thankful to be alive, I now had to grieve the loss of a close companion of mine. Unfortunately, Alice had to move away after being notified about what happened during our camping trip, and we lost touch. I had to learn how to grieve on my own, as no one else would understand the horrors I faced that fateful night. Story 2. Several years ago, I and a group of experienced campers embarked on an adventure deep into a remote national forest for a week-long camping trip. Me, Eric, Jake, Sarah and David enjoyed each other's company, so camping trips almost became a ritual. We were well prepared, our backpacks laden with tents, sleeping bags, cooking gear, and enough supplies to last us through the week. Our spirits were high as we set up camp by the picturesque river, surrounded by towering trees and the soothing sounds of nature. What I didn't expect was the sinister events that occurred that fateful night. The days were filled with laughter, exploration, and the satisfaction of disconnecting from the modern world. But on the third night, the harmony of our camping trip shattered. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast eerie shadows among the trees, two of our companions, Sarah and David, decided to go for a short hike before dinner. They weren't newcomers to the wilderness, both were seasoned campers who had been on numerous trips with us before. I didn't think anything of it, as the rest of us settled with our tents and hunted for anything else we could place. Dinner time rolled around and we expected Sarah and David to return. So, when they didn't return as nightfall settled in, we grew concerned but not overly worried. Hopefully they're just spending more time together, Jake said, attempting to ease the tense atmosphere. An hour passed, and then 2, and still, there was no sign of Sarah and David. Panic began to set in as we called out their names, our voices echoing through the forest. When darkness blanketed the woods and there was no response, my gut feeling told me that they were in some sort of danger. We lit our lanterns and mobilized a search party, praying that they would be in good hands. We searched frantically throughout the night, our flashlights cutting through the impenetrable blackness of the forest. But our efforts yielded no results. There was no trace of Sarah and David, no footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Unfortunately, everyone grew tired and delirious from lack of sleep, and we had to retreat to our tents. David did take some gear with him, and we could only hope that they set up a tent for themselves somewhere in the long forest. However, hours turned into 2 days, our concerns growing into fears and paranoia. What could have possibly happened to them? I think this calls for authorities. We cannot go on like this. Eric spoke up. We enlisted the help of park rangers and search and rescue teams. The forest was combed meticulously, every nook and cranny examined. Still, there was no sign of our missing friends. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. They said that this was a normal occurrence for them, however, I knew that this was anything but normal. They would not leave us in the dark about trekking on their own, so their disappearance was more than bizarre. Desperation gave way to frustration, and then to a bone-chilling fear. The abandoned campsite held all of Sarah and David's belongings, sleeping bags neatly rolled, backpacks untouched, and food supplies intact. It was eerie, beads of sweat trickled from my forehead as we realized in horror that something must have happened. It was as if they evaporated into thin air. On our last night, as I was in my sleeping bag, I heard whispers coming outside of my tent. I didn't want to explore the eerie sounds at first, but then I remembered that Jake and Eric were fast asleep in their own tents. Therefore, someone else had to be outside. As if on cue, they also came outside of their tents. We briefly discussed the whispers we all heard, and without a hitch we retrieved our flashlights and searched for the sound ourselves. As we reached a nearby cliff, the color drained from our faces as we noticed Sarah and David. But they weren't Sarah and David, they couldn't have been. Their bodies were translucent under the moonlight, their skin paler than a sheet of paper. They seemed to be arguing in the distance, paying no attention to our frantic cries. That's when it dawned on me that it wasn't Sarah or David exactly, but "Guys," I whispered, "I think that's their ghost." Jake and Eric fell silent to the absurd revelation, their silence confirming that we knew what we were seeing. Sarah and David continued to argue until they stopped themselves. Me, Jake and Eric watched as Sarah and David grew more panicked, until a gust of wind pushed them to their demise. We screamed as their ghostly figures disappeared, not believing the supernatural event that all three of us witnessed tonight. Suddenly, the air felt chillier, the winds growing stronger and eerie. My stomach dropped, and our bodies moved to run away from the forest. The mystery of their disappearance cast a long, haunting shadow over our camping trip. The forest, once an inviting sanctuary, now felt ominous and foreboding. Some of the locals whispered about supernatural forces at play, suggesting that ancient spirits had taken Sarah and David as retribution for trespassing on their sacred land. Others believed in something more sinister lurking in the woods, perhaps a hidden clan or a crazed hermit who had taken them captive. Regardless of the theories, one thing was certain: the remote national forest held secrets that we could never comprehend. As we packed up our camp and reluctantly left the forest, a sense of loss and unease weighed heavily upon us. Sarah and David's disappearance was a mystery that remained unsolved, a chilling reminder that even in the beauty of nature's embrace, there are places where the darkness can steal away those who dare to wander too far. Story 3. My family and I had always cherished the great outdoors, and we decided to spend a weekend camping at a seemingly peaceful campground deep in the mountains. The journey there was an adventure in itself, with winding roads and breathtaking views that promised an idyllic getaway. We arrived at our campsite just before sunset, nestled among tall pine trees and surrounded by the serene beauty of nature. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, we set up our campsite. The tent went up smoothly, and we gathered around the crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The night air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the sounds of chirping crickets and the distant hoots of owls. It all seemed so peaceful, so perfectly tranquil. It felt as if nothing could go wrong. However, as the night deepened, strange occurrences began to unfold. At first, we heard subtle noises around our campsite, rustling in the bushes, the crack of a twig underfoot, and eerie whispers carried by the wind. Something felt off, but I attributed it to the local wildlife and the nocturnal creatures going about their business. Nonetheless, I decided to keep my guard up. An uncanny feeling erupted in the pit of my stomach as the air grew chillier by the second. We retreated into our tent, hoping for a restful night's sleep. Today was blissful and full of happiness, and I wasn't going to let the tension inside my body ruin that. Unfortunately, that was when things took a chilling turn. The tent began to shake violently, as if a powerful gust of wind was assaulting it from all sides. I glanced at my wife, and her face mirrored the same terror I felt. Our children huddled close, their eyes wide with fear. We have experienced terrible weather before, but this gust of wind was undesirable to say the least. It felt malicious and spiteful, my bones jittering through my strained muscles. Then, a voice, an icy, disembodied voice, sounded just outside our tent. It whispered our names with a sinister familiarity. Alyssa. Michael. Emma. Daniel. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. We couldn't deny it any longer. This was not the work of wildlife or imagination. Some hostile force was at play here, something that defied logic and reason. Whether I liked it or not, I had to discover what it was. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent's entrance, peering into the darkness. But there was nothing there, just the looming trees and the inky night. The voice continued its chilling refrain, growing louder and more insistent. Suddenly, our children screamed in unison. I whipped my head around just in time to witness the dark tall figure that loomed over our tent, its green malevolent eyes bore into mine. Terrified beyond reason, we made a swift decision. We abandoned our campsite, leaving behind our gear, and fled into the night, guided only by the pale light of the moon. We stumbled through the underbrush, away from that accursed place, until exhaustion forced us to stop. We had to sleep in our car tonight. As dawn broke, we cautiously returned to our campsite, hoping it had all been a nightmare. But the reality that awaited us was far more disturbing. Our once intact tent was shredded, its fabric torn to shreds. The campfire had burned itself out, leaving behind a circle of ashes. The ground around us was covered in strange symbols and markings, etched into the earth with an eerie precision. There was an otherworldly energy that invaded our campsite, and if it weren't for my wife's horrified expression, I would have assumed this to be a figment of my imagination. We reported the inexplicable events to the park authorities, but they were as baffled as we were. They scoured the area, searching for any explanation, but none was found. Nothing was normal about the events that occurred. Yet it felt uncanny, the energy unexplainable but similar to something I experienced before. I reenacted the terrifying encounter to my friends. No one believed me at first, which was understandable because of the surreality of it all. However, we decided to search up the campsite online to find out our own answers, and it was horrendous to say the least. Articles spoke of vengeful spirits haunting the campground, seeking retribution for some ancient transgression. Others wrote about a hidden cult, practicing dark rituals in the depths of the woods, invoking forces beyond human comprehension. Another spoke about the incident of 1989, where a group of teenagers went camping and attempted their own ritual to seek out spirits and ghosts. Their bodies were later found in the remains of ashes. To this day, my family refuses to go camping again. The memory of that fateful night lingers in our minds. The tranquility of the mountainside has been forever tainted by the evil spirit that haunted our tent. Of course, I am grateful that we all made it out alive, but I couldn't hide the anger that I held in my heart that these